So tonight's speaker, talking to us about the art of the movie poster, is Victor Moreno. We first met Victor when he was one of the 18 presenters at the Ignite number 8 Phoenix, which was held here at the Phoenix Art Museum last June. And his presentation about movie posters that night was one of the top-rated presentations of the evening, and we just thought this would be a great program for the Phoenix Art Museum. So Victor is a graphic designer who specializes in custom high-end websites and social network profiles on sites like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And his work includes DVD covers for commercial release and posters, including movie posters, for events and special screenings. His clients range from recording artists such as Paul McCartney, Janet Jackson, and David Sanborn, to media companies like Sony, Samuel Goldwyn Films, and Warner Brother Pictures, and individuals such as John Edwards. He's someone with a long time appreciation for art. He has an undergraduate degree in history and a law degree, who could have gone down a very different path, and as he describes his career as a graphic designer in the entertainment industry, it was a very happy accident. So we're happy about the accident too, Victor, and help me in welcoming Victor.
All right, well, thank you very much for that ovation. And it's always a pleasure to speak here at the Phoenix Art Museum. Now, tonight I'm here to talk to you about the art of the movie poster. And I think one of the great ways to start about this is pretty much defining what a movie poster is. A movie poster, point blank, in its most simple form, is a piece of advertising. In the realm where I work, they're not even called movie posters anymore. They're called key art. And key art is defined most simply as the single image around which an entire campaign of promotion of a film is defined. But within that regard, throughout the history of film, movie posters have been defined by the guiding hand of an advertising agency, which puts that guidance into the hands of an artist, a painter, a digital artist, whose imagination defines the landscape of what you have a preconception of a film is going to be. And now my presentation is simply put to show you how the evolution of film art from advertising to art back to advertising still leaves a large field for what can be considered fine art. These are three of perhaps the most recognizable movie posters you can think of. Birth of a Nation is a 1915 documentary, pseudo-documentary by D.W. Griffith. This is a 1915 Moore Theater poster, which basically breaks down the ingredients of what a film poster is. It tells you where the film is playing, when it's playing, and a little bit about the film. And this is a lobby card. It's not an actual poster, but this is the basic recipe from which film advertising develops. The poster all the way on the left is for Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis, which has the famous android Maria on it. As you can see, these are all different sizes, and that'll play into what I'm about to talk to right now. And this is Frankenstein from 1931. This is actually probably the most expensive film poster in the world. There's only one left in existence, and I think it's valued at several $1 million. Now, just to give you a basic example of where the history of movie posters comes from, the National Screen Service was an entity that existed from the 1920s to the mid-1980s. This tells you a little bit about where we've come from and where we're going. Back then, there weren't that many movie theaters. And basically, film producers such as Warner Brothers and RKO, they would leave this company, the Screen Service, to produce advertisements for every single movie theater in the entire country. It was basically completely out of the studio's hands, aside from some advertising materials, perhaps some photos, and an idea of what the film might be. National Screen Service isn't really around anymore for reasons I'll get into, but they lost prominence mainly because of progress. As the 80s rolled around, the idea of movie palaces and single-screen theaters went out of play, and now we have multiplexes. Before then, these giant film palaces, which used to be theaters, could display very irregular poster sizes, from 5 to 6 foot size poster banners to building size movie posters. And the National Screen Service knew the specific needs of all these people and these theater operators and produced all the advertisement for them specifically. The National Screen Service also had a very interesting function, is that it cataloged every film ever made throughout that year, and this was done on the NSS Poster Index. So if you ever see a classic film poster, at the very bottom you'll see 2 numbers, such as the Star Wars poster, which will have the year and the number of film it was that year. So Star Wars was the 21st film released in 1977. That tells you something really interesting right there, in that Star Wars came out in May of 1977, and it was only the 21st film released that year. On average, there's probably 21 films released within the first 2 to 3 weeks of the entire year today. Now, I'm going to tell you about some of the key figures in the development of poster design. One of the first and most interesting figures is Bill Gould. Now, Bill Gould is a very interesting figure in that today would probably, and even then, would rightly be considered a Renaissance man. He was a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a photographer. He was trained at the Pratt Institute of Design, but he's also mainly known for doing the posters from some of the most famous films of all time, such as Casablanca, James Dean's Giant, Baby Doll by Elia Kazan, Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand, Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman, Bullet with Steve McQueen, Dirty Harry, The Exorcist. Bill Gould is actually still with us, and he's actually done the posters for every single Clint Eastwood movie ever made. Ever. Even now. And he formed an advertisement agency in 1962 called Bill Gould Advertising that's still in existence. And the important thing about this is, aside from being a Renaissance man and a true illustrator, he also had a great eye for talent, and some of the most important artists in the history of film design came from Bill Gould Advertising. Now, you'll see right here, I have the poster for Casablanca, which Bill Gould illustrated. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a case study here, going over some of the elements in this. Now, the poster for Casablanca is one of the first examples of collage-style posters. If you look at film posters today, you tend to still see this, where there's a collection of giant heads. Of course, now they're called giant floating heads, and they just sort of float there for no reason. Here, they create a narrative. As you can see, if you look at the faces of the different characters, which are illustrated, you can sort of tell, even without knowing the film, assuming you don't know the film, who's a villain, who's sort of treacherous. You can tell by the size of Humphrey Bogart that he's not only the star, but the protagonist. And you can see Ingrid Bergman, she's the second lead, so she's a little bit smaller. So it sort of goes around. But at the same time, by looking at sort of poses of the different characters, you can get a kind of idea of the narrative, and they're juxtaposed that way on purpose. So you look at Humphrey Bogart, and your eye sort of just leads you around. So you can kind of tell, oh, it's going to be some sort of crime story, maybe, and she's important, and oh, that guy has a fez. So this is going to take place in another country. Of course, it's called Casablanca. But it also defines a mood. As you can tell, this is one of the first examples of film noir, which is a genre which basically the lead is sort of a somber, sort of defeated character who narrates the film as a voiceover, but it's usually, in a way, it's a story of a small redemption. Now, a lot of Philip Marlowe stories, which Humphrey Bogart tended to star in, follow this same formula, and they all tend to have the same sort of style of typography, where you have the sort of Art Deco font, you have the sort of hard-boiled character, not that, we're trying to generalize, but I'm just saying that this, in turn, defines a genre and establishes a mood. So if you ever saw the poster for Casablanca with its Art Deco fonts, you'd understand, oh, this is a film noir film. So if you ever saw something that subverted that, like this poster from the Paley Fest, which is a film and television conference earlier this year for Parks and Recreation, you can say, wait a minute, that looks familiar yet somehow wrong. But at the same time, it tells you that poster was important and iconic because you don't even have to know There's no outright reference to Casablanca, but you know that's what it's parodying. And by seeing the sorts of characters that take the place of the characters we know, you can see, oh, it's saying something at the same time. It's using that style to create a narrative. It's juxtaposing the images, and here we're subverting a genre. So that tells you how just one image, which defines a campaign, can set a tone without really saying anything. Now, here's another example of Bill Gould's work. What you see on the right is a poster for the 1950s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the style of exploitation films, where basically they would put this up in a drive-in and you would say, oh, that's a monster movie. Look at that, the big bold fonts, the fact that it's sort of lurid and the colors are in a way sort of like jarring. The one on the right is one that Bill Gould designed for the 1978 Philip Kaufman directed remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And you can see, even though they're both horror movies, the one on the right is a lot more cerebral. There's not a really in-your-face sort of imagery. It's sort of disquieting. You see the roots of a plant, and you see the same image doubled with a sort of script font. So in a way, the fact that it's not lurid is sort of unsettling. So it makes you think this might be something really interesting, but at the same time, it's disconcerting. And it goes with the white background, not unlike his other work, because at the same time, it's leaving it blank, which draws a page from modernism. Now, this is a style that tends to flow through a lot of Bill Gould's work. It's called single image narration. Now, let's see here. All right, what you'll tend to see is all 5 of these are from different decades. This one here is a poster for Elia Kazan's Baby Doll. What you see is an image here of the actress in a crib, which is sort of disconcerting, but if you know the plot of the film, you can see the basic plot of Baby Doll is that she's a 19-year-old virgin who's been promised to Karl Malden on her birthday, and so she's basically being kept as a woman child. She sleeps in a crib, she sucks her thumb. And the whole image of the film is this is Baby Doll, and it tells you that she's, a virgin, and all these men want her because she's a sexualized woman child. But at the same time, just the image and the font itself is kind of disconcerting. But there's script to go along with it. And this is something that's really indicative of a lot of his films. We're like, oh, what's that about? And then you read a little bit about it, and it lures you in. The same is true for Cool Hand Luke, which is this very strange image of Paul Newman, but at the same time it has some script explaining the basic goals of the movie. The one for Clockwork Orange here, which Bill Gould illustrated. Some of the other ones here he also photographed and just put together. This one tells you, this is the story of Alex, a boy with a penchant for rape, ultraviolence, and Beethoven. Which, again, the white background, it's sort of stark. The one for The Exorcist is really interesting because it's just that very iconic image of Max von Sydow standing at the door, and it says something along the lines of something incredible is happening to this girl, and only one man can stop it. He is the exorcist. You know this, and it completely shies away from mentioning religion aside from the mention of exorcism, which is really interesting in a way because it opens it up to people who might not be Christian and are just interested in what this might be a cerebral film. This might not be a horror film. Here's one of his posters for one of Clint Eastwood's films. This is for Dirty Harry. This is from the early 70s. And it's just a very stark portrait of Clint Eastwood, and it says, Detective Harry Callahan, he doesn't break murder cases, he smashes them. And that's what you see there exactly. And that really resonates with Clint Eastwood because he does all of Clint Eastwood's movies, all of them, every single one. Now, another artist that came from Bill Gould Studios is Saul Bass. Now, Saul Bass is a very famous graphic designer. He's not just famous for his posters, he's actually most famous for designing all of the credit sequences for Alfred Hitchcock's films. So if you've ever seen North by Northwest or The Birds, you see a lot of examples of Saul Bass's work in that he's very famous for something known as kinetic typography. You saw an example of it in the National Theater ad where you saw text sort of flying around the screen. And in a lot of Hitchcock movies, that's what it is. The camera follows text as it sort of zooms around and draws you in. Typography and minimalism are why Saul Bass is such an important influence on development of graphic design and poster design even today. If you see any movie poster or title sequence where there's text flying and there's super minimal cutout images, not even unlike the James Bond title sequences, it's because of Saul Bass. And for example, the poster here for Vertigo, several months ago there was a new film with Ryan Reynolds released called Barry that almost completely aped this poster verbatim. Exodus is a very famous movie. I think it's an Otto Preminger film that Saul Bass also did the credit sequence for, which is just a story about the settlement of Israel from Palestine. And it's just, you look at that and you can already tell just from the simple title treatment, without really seeing anything else, that it's going to be a very harrowing film. Saul Bass also did the theatrical release poster for The Shining. Now, he didn't design the title sequence or any of the other film work, or any of the other design work for The Shining. But the thing that's most interesting about it is most posters for The Shining today actually feature a shot of Jack Nicholson breaking through the door. But instead of using the actual title sequences used in the film, they use this typography designed by Saul Bass as the title case of the movie, which is really interesting since most of the other Stanley Kubrick films re-released by Warner Brothers usually just use Futura, which is a very basic and famous typeface that was Stanley Kubrick's favorite typeface. But this one is so well known, they use this instead. Now, another artist that worked with Saul Bass and was employed by Bill Gould is Bob Peak. Bob Peak is a very famous figure in the development of poster illustration. He's known today as the father of modern movie poster illustration. In fact, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences just had an exhibit dedicated to the body of his work, which actually ended about a month ago. He's that important. What's most important about Bob Peak is he worked with a lot of very well-known filmmakers, and he was the first really legitimate artist to come from the world of illustration and design and was given the reins to say, we're going to release a movie with this fairly unknown Chinese fighter who was on the Green Hornet, and this is going to be a starring vehicle. See if you can do something with that. And this is the poster for Enter the Dragon. Now, the thing that's really interesting about it is even though Bruce Lee is the central figure, the entire movie, it goes away from the single image narration that Bill Gould was talking about, and we see every single character in the movie. In a way, the poster encapsulates the entire film. If you've ever seen Enter the Dragon, you would know that Bruce Lee is the main character. He's been hired by MI5 to infiltrate a tournament hosted by Han. Along with goes John Saxon, and, I'm going to feel bad for not remembering his name right now, Black Belt Jones. The two of them are basically a team come from the U.S. John Saxon falls in love with her, who works for Han right here. Bad things happen, that's why the cops are involved. Oh yeah, and there's this tournament going on, you know. So if you see this, and they get there on a junk. So the poster tells you the entire movie. The poster for Apocalypse Now is pretty much the same way. Originally, the poster for Apocalypse Now, which is one of Francis Ford Coppola's best-known films, was just this sun right here and the reflection of this lake. There wasn't even a title treatment or a picture of Marlon Brando or a picture of Martin Sheen. Francis Ford Coppola was completely fine with that. The studio that released Apocalypse Now, which, if you don't know, Apocalypse Now is one of the most expensive films ever made. It took several years to make and basically almost didn't happen because there's a great documentary about it called Hearts of Darkness that talks about all the difficulties in making the film. Not least among them was the fact that Marlon Brando showed up to the set not having read the script and was about 100 pounds overweight. So he had to film the entire film in shadow, pretty much. So the studio releasing the film said, no, we've sunk this much money and pay this. You need to have Marlon Brando on that poster. I don't care what he's doing. So all Bob Peak did is he took the same poster and he just painted Marlon Brando there. And then it's like, oh, well, we need Martin Sheen because he's actually the hero. So then you painted him there. And then it says, oh, but we need ships because there's a big ship sequence. So he added some ships. And they wanted to add Robert Duvall, but then he said, no, I have to have the logo. If I put him there, then it'll just be really busy. And in the end, it works. And Bob Peak is also well known for establishing a tradition that you'll see mainly in films today in the event poster or a teaser poster. This painting here is for the 1978 Richard Donner Superman film, Superman the Movie. A lot of people at Warner Brothers just said, well, it should just have, Christopher Reeve on it, and that should be it. And, you can't really build a movie around an unknown because Christopher Reeve had never been in a big movie. He was a theatrically trained actor. He'd only been in stage plays with Katharine Hepburn at this time. This was his big break. So all Bob Peak thought to do was, well, people want to see a Superman movie, and he came up with the idea of the copy of You'll Believe a Man Could Fly. So all of the posters for Superman the movie feature flight of some kind, and it was exemplified by this sort of rainbow blur, where you still see the red cape, the yellow outline in the S, and the blue. So Superman is on the poster in a way. It's suggested, and that would what makes it such a strong image. If you see most cover art, even up to recently for Superman, this is the poster that they use, not one that has Christopher Reeve on it. This was made several years later. It was for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and basically he also did this film because Paramount thought, well, he did such a good job with this. They both start with an S, and so it's a similar kind of thing. You have Kirk, Spock, and Ilea, who's a very tiny character in the movie, but at the time it was thought she would be a really important character. She wasn't. But, they still have the rays of hope exemplified there. Just like, oh, this is, action lines, which is an illustrated tradition where, if you have these bold lines coming at an angle or down when varying width, it suggests and denotes action. But if you do it in a rainbow, which is suggesting transporters, which if you know Star Trek, there's lots of transportering going on. And it's just there. And it's a very straightforward, very entertaining, it draws your eye, and you'd say, hey, this is an event movie. I really need to see this. Now, from that came other illustrators. There was Richard Amsel, who Richard Amsel is one of the most prolific poster illustrators of all time, even though he had a remarkably short career. He got discovered by a national talent contest where he won the rights to draw the poster for the Barbra Streisand movie, Hello, Dolly. I think it's a Barbra Streisand movie. But he won these, and because of this, people were really into his work. He had this very dynamic illustrated style. This is basically all color pencil. And the thing about that is, Lucasfilm, because George Lucas is a big fan of serials from the 1930s, which tended to use this sort of dynamic, sort of like penciled comic book style, he hired Amsel to do the posters for his big post-Star Wars film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So these are the two posters for Raiders of the Lost Ark, both done by Richard Amsel. He's actually most famous for doing a series of 40 illustrated covers for TV Guide in the early 80s, because in the early 80s, TV Guide had illustrated covers. Crazy, right? But he also did the covers for a lot of really famous posters, and all of them are very iconic. The posters for The Sting and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and unfortunately, Richard Amsel ended up dying of AIDS in 1985. So he had a very protracted 8-year career doing poster design, but yet he still did pretty much hundreds of posters. The very last poster he did was for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, which he finished a week before he died. And after that, another illustrator that George Lucas found and sort of developed was Drew Struzan. And Drew Struzan is actually probably the most famous movie poster illustrator alive today. If you see any Star Wars poster now, you've seen his art. He is actually Lucasfilm's chief illustrator in terms of the Star Wars posters. For international distribution, no foreign country or Europe is allowed to use any image that he hasn't painted for advertising any Star Wars related product. These are the three posters he did for the re-release of the Star Wars trilogy in the mid-90s, the special editions for Star Wars, or as they call it, Episode 4, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And these are all of the Indiana Jones posters he did, because Lucasfilm also owns Indiana Jones, and he developed a very good relationship with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, obviously. So these are the posters for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, and Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which, even though it isn't a very good movie, has a very good poster. Now, what's really interesting is I'm going to go into these a little bit. The poster for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, it's actually the first post-Richard Amsel work that had been done for Lucasfilm since he had died, and Drew Struzan basically sort of had to prove himself. So he went with a sort of iconic shot of Indiana Jones. And Drew Struzan is actually known for doing his work very quickly. Usually, from what I understand, the poster for Temple of Doom, he did it in 2 days. And basically what he does is he uses airbrush acrylics on a giant piece of illustration board that's about the size of an actual movie poster, and he goes in and does all the details with color pencil. So basically, you can sort of see it here, where all this area is pretty much just airbrushed, and then he went in and did all the detail work on the face, the hat, this drum here, all in pencil, and the whip here on the bottom, and then they just added the title treatment at the bottom. And it's a very, eye-catching poster, and has very simple copy. Trust him. Now, and what's actually really interesting is that of all the Indiana Jones movies, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, even though it's the second Indiana Jones movie, is actually the first chronologically, which is why it doesn't make sense after you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. You have to pretend that's part 2 and this is part 1. So, and what's really interesting is here in the poster for The Last Crusade, you can see that Bill Gould and Bob Peak were both really strong influences on Drew Struzan, because he sort of does the same. This is sort of a hybrid of the two styles, the single image narration and the idea of telling the entire movie in one image. So here you see Indiana Jones. If you haven't seen part 3, I'll just tell you the movie really quickly through the poster. Indiana Jones is looking for his father, Henry Jones Sr., played here by Sean Connery. He has to go to, I think it's Morocco, with the help of Salah, and he goes there with his boss over at the university. They ride horses, and they have to fight Nazis, and it turns out this chick has the Grail Diary. So, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is pretty much the same. Here's Indiana Jones, but he's old now. This is his son, right here, Shia LaBeouf, that he had with Marion, who's in the movie that we don't have a poster for. This is his partner, who's really not that trustworthy. He's trying to find this alien crystal skull, which he gets chased by Indians, evoking the other movie whose poster we don't see here. Oh, and there's a Nazi chick. Oh, no, she's actually a Russian. And he eventually gets it, but he has to run away. So that's the movie. You don't have to watch it now. Don't watch it. But Drew Struzan basically he's done some of the most famous film posters of all time. I'm pretty sure we've all seen this poster. It's the poster for E.T. the Extraterrestrial. This poster and this image is so famous that it's actually the logo for Steven Spielberg's production company, Amblin Entertainment. But it's basically an airbrush poster that took him about 12 hours to do. I mean, just think of that. From concept to execution, we still see it every time we go see a movie that Steven Spielberg directed that has Tom Hanks in it. And here's Drew Struzan's poster for Back to the Future, which, again, I'm pretty sure he also designed the logo face, which in and of itself is pretty iconic. And again, the poster tells you everything. He's a man and he's out of time. And if we haven't seen it, you see this image right here in the margins. It's actually the poster for Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which Drew Struzan also did. And again, it harkens back to the Casablanca poster that I originally mentioned. In fact, it's pretty much a direct evocation of it, because if you remembered what Humphrey Bogart was doing, oh yeah, he was a big guy with a gun, followed by a smaller chick who might be mysterious. And and basically Blade Runner is a postmodern film noir film. Now, around the 1980s, we started seeing a little bit of a dearth of illustrated poster design. This is the poster for the 1989 Tim Burton directed Michael Keaton Batman film. This is an illustrated poster. I mean, it's been airbrushed, but you can tell it's illustrated because of the glare detail on the bat. You can also see that it's been airbrushed because of the background shading of the yellow and gold on the bat symbol, and the Batman logo itself. This is a German poster for Batman Returns 2 years later. There's something very obvious here. This poster has no illustration on it. It's actually photocomposite. It's taking the three main characters, Batman, Catwoman, Danny DeVito, and you see a hint of the plans going on with the penguins. I'm not going to spoil the movie. I'll spoil bad ones, but this one's actually good. And this is a German poster. It's not called Batman's Rucker. It sounds like an ice cream, but it's not. I'd probably try it. But what this poster does, in its simplicity, is it signals a break from illustrators dominating the field of poster design and execution. This kind of layout might actually still have been done by an illustrator, at least in the breakdowns or layout, but it was accomplished fully by photocompositing. It takes much less time, and it reaches pretty much the same result, because you can kind of tell an idea of what the movie is going to be about by looking at it. And as time went on, this seemed like a good idea in practice, but then came the development of things like floating heads, where you'd have 3 heads floating and the names wouldn't go with the proper person they belong to. And this is because in key art design, actors started realizing in situations like this, well, there's 3 people here. Who's actually the star? You could say, well, Batman's obviously, Michael Keaton's the star of this movie because he's on top. But then Michelle Pfeiffer's people would probably say, no. Michelle Pfeiffer is the star because she's in the center. She's the center of attention. And Danny DeVito's people would probably say, no. Danny DeVito is the star of this film because his image is the last one you see, so it's the most important. Now, in the type of jobs I've done, this is actually the type of conversation we actually end up having. And, at that point, it just sort of becomes like a test between people to see who can, not start laughing first. But in the end, the way that was decided is, oh, I know, we'll put the names in order. So Michael Keaton, he's the star because he's first. And, Danny DeVito, she's the star because... Wait, what? No, that's not right. No, because they're contractually obligated to be basically featured in a certain way. So while Michelle Pfeiffer is not Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer is featured last, even though you wouldn't see it here, because she's the most important. Or at least someone convinced her of it. But you can see how the poster doesn't really make sense. But even though we started to move away from that, today we have digital design that can still be really creative. Both of these posters were designed by a company called BLT and Associates. And even though that makes me hungry, it has nothing to do with what you might think. This is a wild poster for The Dark Knight, which came out in 2008. Now, when a wild poster is really interesting in that they're highly collectible because studios design them to be posted illegally. So if you live in Los Angeles or New York and somebody's building something outside and you see a big wooden scaffolding that says "Post No Bills," it's the advertising department at Warner Brothers whose job it says, no, you need to make these up and post those where they say "Post No Bills." And because of that, they don't print a lot of them, but they usually tend to be wallpapered all over the place. And because of that, illustrators tend to have more freedom because in the end they're not considered as important as real movie posters. So this was a character poster ostensibly for the Joker, which is the main villain in The Dark Knight. But you mainly see Batman. So they told BLT and Associates, we need a character poster for the Joker. So what they did is, you see these are all Joker playing cards. So all the ones where it seems like it's a picture of Batman, they're flipped upside down and sort of taped together, except for here where they just kind of couldn't get away from that. And they just did like this sort of like Joker smiley face. And then they suggested, well, we could do that. We'll just have an X-Acto knife, and the whole thing is sort of like a joke that the Joker's playing. It's like a crazy collage, because the little slogans throughout were actually the Joker's lines throughout the entire movie. So that one says, it's simple, kill the Batman. And around here it says, it's all part of the plan. If you look at the bat symbol, which is the logo for the movie, it's actually not a bat. It just says ha 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 over and over again. The bat head is an H, and the tail is an upside down A. So it's actually pretty clever in a lot of ways, because it's sort of you get to know that the movie's sort of flip side about Batman and Joker, but at the same time the Joker's not actually on this poster at all, because if unfortunately Heath Ledger had died really early on before the film came out, so they had to kind of find a way to get around using him actually in the advertising for the film. So this was pretty much the clever way of like, we'll have a Joker poster without really having the Joker on it. And it actually worked pretty well. This is the poster for the 2008 film Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. Now what's really interesting is if you look at this poster, and if you've been paying attention throughout my little talk here, it looks a lot like a Drew Struzan poster, doesn't it? Yeah, but it's completely digital. Because BLT and Associates, they started off in the same tradition as Bill Gould and Associates, where they looked at these sort of classic layouts and compositions, and while they still work in the digital realm, they sort of strive to design things that look like they would be illustrated. This poster could very easily have been illustrated, but they sort of went the extra mile to use digital assets to do the same thing. If you look at the way these images of Tony Stark and Jeff Bridges, who plays Obadiah Stane in the film, that's his character's name, and Terrence Howard and Gwyneth Paltrow, they've all been lit from the same angle, so it sort of has like the look of that Casablanca poster that I posted about very early on, where Tony Stark is the main character. This is his antagonist. This girl's important, and he probably is too. And by the way, there's the bad guy. Oh, and did you know this is about the military-industrial complex? Yep. And just so that you know that Iron Man is the flip side to Tony Stark. Look, Iron Man is the flip side to Tony Stark. So in that way, the poster's composition is still really spot on, and you could figure out what the movie's about just looking at the poster. And the reason posters like this are still around, are designed anymore, is because, as I said really early on, the National Screen Service went out of business. Well, actually still exists. It's owned by Technicolor now. But because there's so many multiplexes today, it's impossible for one company that has regional offices to deliver posters to all of them. So studios just do it all themselves. So studios deliver all these this is why we have standardized poster sizes. They're all 27 by 40, because they can just send it off anytime a movie poster is shipped off, and stuff like this is usually handled by a guerrilla art agency or a smaller arm of an ad agency. Now, there's also been a resurgence of illustrated posters. Now, usually this is done specifically at the request of a director. This is a poster that Drew Struzan did for The Shawshank Redemption, which if you haven't seen it, you really should see that movie. But the director of The Shawshank Redemption is a man named Frank Darabont, who is a tremendous fan of Drew Struzan and illustrated poster designs. At the San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago, he was appearing for a panel on this movie called The Mist. And he was asked, oh, well, what do you think about movie poster design and today, and it's, oh, I love Drew Struzan because that guy can draw all these floating heads. That's bullshit. So he sort of goes out of his way to hire Drew Struzan to basically do posters for all this. This is for Shawshank Redemption. He also illustrated the poster for The Green Mile. He also illustrated the poster for The Mist. He does the posters for all of Frank Darabont's films, much like Bill Gould does the posters for all of Clint Eastwood's films. So they have a very synergistic relationship. In fact, the main character in the movie The Mist, which Darabont directed, is a movie poster illustrator, and all the movie poster art in that movie is done by Drew Struzan. This is a poster for a film called Rubber. It is a French movie about a killer psychic tire. And the little tagline says, "Are you tired of the expected?" See, that's a pun. It's funny. And this was done by a graphic designer in Los Angeles named Ollie Moss. And Ollie Moss comes from the same tradition of illustrators like Saul Bass, where he does this very minimalistic style work, and it's all done in silkscreen format, where he'll break an image down to its most simplistic style and try to do the single image narrative that people like Bill Gould or Bob Peak, to some degree, are well known for. So that's it. So it's an evil tire. It's made out of rubber. There you go. That's the poster. But there's a very big collector's market for this. This was from a screening at a theater in Texas called the Alamo Drafthouse. They run a genre film festival every year called Fantastic Fest. And the studio that released this movie in the United States, Magnet, liked the poster so much they bought the rights to it from Moss, and it's the official movie poster for the film. A similar story could be done by the artist of this poster, whose name is Tyler Stout. This movie is called The FP. It is about two dueling gangs of suburban youth who wage street fights by playing Dance Dance Revolution, which is a video game where you jump on a pad and you have dance fights for points. If you look at, I don't know if you can tell, but basically the background here is a bunch of up and down arrows like a video game pad. And these are what the gang members in the movie look like. One guy is missing an eye. I don't know how that happened. I kind of don't want to know. But the thing that's interesting about this movie is, if you remember the poster I showed you earlier by Bob Peak about the Enter the Dragon poster, and the collage-style posters I mentioned earlier by Bill Gould, it follows that same exact format, because right here you see the hero with the girl, right here you see the antagonist, another antagonist, the same girl, this guy again. So you can pretty much tell what the movie's going to be. Stout's posters are really popular. He just did a poster for a collected edition of the Quentin Tarantino movie Kill Bill that was screened for 1 week in Los Angeles. The posters were sold at the show for around $20, if I believe, and right now they are selling on poster collector sites for upwards of $2,500. And because of this, a lot of studios now hire him to do these illustrated posters. There was a documentary on a film called Troll 2 called Best Worst Movie that he did the poster for. He did the poster for another film called Hell Ride, which is a film directed by Larry Bishop. It's one of Dennis Hopper's last movies, where they both play the heads of biker gangs, and one of the guys wears a mariachi costume. And basically, that's where we are with movie posters today. It sort of came full circle from this whole sort of advertising realm to a realm where, oh wait, this is legitimate art, back to advertising, back to, we can go a lot of different ways with it. We can have that illustrator's tradition, but do it digitally. We can have actual illustrators work on our film, and we can still have floating heads, but, we might not know who Michelle Pfeiffer is, or we might think she's Danny DeVito. But at the same time, I think you can tell that art is sort of in the eye of the beholder, and as long as people are really willing to run and run with what they feel is the best possible design, and a film production company can say, yeah, it might catch on. A big reason a lot of these posters, still have such strong power, especially Drew Struzan's, because they sort of harken back to something that we experienced when we were younger. I mean, I can look at the posters for Indiana Jones, and it reminds me of being a little kid at home and just wanting to have a bullwhip, And, if I see that poster or a poster book says, oh man, I really want a bullwhip, but I think I just want that book. So we build a connection with films from our youth. I could be really into Casablanca, and if I see a box set that has that same art, I might want it just for my shelf so I can pull that movie out one day and just, say, play it again, Sam, And that's the power of movie posters. They really harken back to this sort of spirit we have around films, that they represent something to us, whether in our youth or a happy memory or something that we sort of ascribe to be, and it has a power. And that power can be wielded just by the simple art without even having the title say Blade Runner, Superman, Back to the Future. It's just the figure itself, or an image of it. And that's true of any artwork, whether it's a painting by Picasso. You look at a painting of Guernica and it's Guernica. You don't need it to say Guernica, directed by Steven Spielberg. So that's the art of the movie poster. And, if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on my website. If you use the cell phones, you can find me on the Twitter. And if you have any questions, you can totally feel free to ask me now or find me later. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks.